Good afternoon, this is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding, here to discuss one of the most common questions that we get here at Golding & Golding, which is what is the difference between an FBAR and Form 8938? FBAR is a FinCEN form. Form 8938 is an IRS form. They're both used to report foreign assets, accounts, and investments. So let's jump into it. And instead of repeating accounts, assets, and investments for each sentence, I'm just going to refer to assets, okay? Taxpayers who are U.S. persons, which means U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, foreign nationals who meet the substantial presence test, are required to report their foreign assets to the U.S. government each year on various different forms. Now, a lot of times people think it's just bank accounts, but it's more than bank accounts, right? You've got your checking, your savings, your current accounts, but you also have investment accounts, fixed deposits and CDs, foreign pension plans, mutual funds, ETFs, life insurance that has a surrender value. So there's lots of different categories of assets that are reportable. Likewise, there's many different forms that you may have to file as well. You may have to put the same asset on many different forms in the same year. It's repetitive and there's a lot of double counting. Some of the common forms are the FBAR, Form 8938, Form 3520, Form 8621, Form 5471, etc., etc. What is important is that these forms typically have different threshold filing requirements and different due dates. In addition, to file an extension is different from some forms than the other, like a 3520A, which is used to report U.S. ownership of a foreign trust, requires you file specific extension form 7004. That's different than if you're filing like a form 4868 to extend your tax return. But when you kind of weed through all of it all, the two main forms you need to know about are the FBAR and the Form 8938. So let's jump into it. Let's go through some of the main differences first. One of the key ones is you have to file a tax return. If you don't have to file a tax return, you don't have to file a Form 8938, even if you meet the threshold requirement for filing Form 8938. So, an 8938 is only required in a year that you met the threshold and you were required to file a tax return. The FBAR is different. You have to file the FBAR if you meet the threshold, whether or not you have to file a tax return in that year. Next thing is the threshold requirements. They're different. You may have to put the same asset on both forms, but maybe not, depending on the threshold. Let's take an example. So with the FBAR, it's more than $10,000 on any given day of the year for the total annual aggregate total of the accounts. Let's just keep it simple. You have one account with $20,000 on it. You file the FBAR. Form 8938 varies based on whether you're living in the U.S. or you're living abroad, and whether you're filing joint or single. So if you have one account that's $20,000 and that's the only asset you have, while it's the type of asset that will go on Form 8938, you haven't met the threshold requirement, so you don't have to file the Form 8938. You don't have to file that form just because you filed an FBAR. And one very, very important difference between the FBAR and the 8938 is the financial interest. In order to have to report an account or asset on Form 8938, you have to have a financial interest in it, right? Some sort of ownership, typically, that will mean. Whereas for an FBAR, you don't have to. So your grandma wants to leave you some money. She's a foreign national. She adds you to the account. You don't dare touch that money until one day it becomes yours. You're on the account and you have no real financial interest in it now, at least no present financial interest. You have no ownership of the account, but you still report it for FBAR purposes. A couple of other considerations with the forms. There is overlapping between them, of course, right? But it's not identical. Here's an example. Excuse me. If you have a bank account, that's going to be reported on both. But let's say you have a stock certificate. Well, a stock certificate is going to be reported on Form 8938 if you meet the threshold. Stock certificates are not reported on the FBAR. But if it's a stock account, let's say, like an Ameritrade, Scottrade equivalent overseas, that would go on both forms, assuming the threshold requirements were met for both. Filing extension is a bit different too. Since the Form 8938 is part of your tax return, if you file an extension for your tax return, the Form 8938 goes on extension as well. With the FBAR, it's due April 15th. You might find stuff online saying it's due June 30th. That changed, I think, in 2016. Now it's due April 15th, but it's on what's called automatic extension. So you get into October, you don't have to file any specific form. Another very important difference between the forms is how you get penalized if you're out of compliance. For the Form 8938, it's just a $10,000 penalty. There's a continuing failure to file penalty that goes up to, I think, $50,000. But that's it. It's not based on the value of the assets. With FBAR, if it's non-willful, it's just whether you filed the form or not. So there was a Supreme Court case in 2023 called Bittner, which basically said, no, IRS, you can't penalize people based on the number of accounts. For non-willfulness, you could just penalize them based on whether they filed the form or not, which is great for taxpayers, right? If it's willful, that's different. Then it's a 50% penalty on the maximum account value that was unreported. So if you had an artificially high account in the year, a common situation I see here with willfulness is maybe you got an inheritance, a foreign inheritance, or you sold the home and you had like $2 million in the foreign account, but you only had it in there for a short period, so you didn't want to report it because you're going to take that money out again. If you decide to do the VDP program and you're willful, you have to look at the maximum account value on that day. So you could be paying like $1 million penalty in that example. So you don't want to be willful FBAR if you can help it. If you're out of compliance, you haven't filed the FBAR, the 8938 in prior years or other forms as well, the IRS has various programs to assist you with getting into compliance. There's the VDP if you're willful. If you're non-willful, there's a lot more options available. There's the streamlined procedures. There's delinquency procedures, possibly a reasonable cause submission. We got a ton of free information available on our main website and our sub-websites. You can always reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation if it's appropriate to your matter and it's something that we handle here. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.